Sarah has been working with WCL now for probably at least a year. You might recognize her as one of our facilitators from the After 5 sessions. She has an incredible background. She comes to us from an operations background and a management background. So she's been embedded in the business for all of you who come from, something like an operations background. She went back to school and got her master's in organizational psychology. And since doing that, has also become a coach and is working with people in that capacity. She's a facilitator as well, which is why her skills are so wonderful at WCL, and just an org development consultant. So she can help you with many different facets. Today, she's going to talk to us about kind of a framework for leadership, breaking it down, thinking about some of the aspects for it. I think it's something that we can all apply. As with you guys, we're all learning on this new vehicle, this new tool we have of, I guess, the screen. And so we want you to feel comfortable jumping in, asking questions, and at the end, speaking up in any way you would like. If you're patient with us, we'll be patient with you. And with that, I'd like to have you all welcome Sarah Budd. Hi, Sarah.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I have a company called Gambit Coaching and Consulting. I'm an organizational psychologist. I consult, as Sue said, about organizational development. I do executive coaching, leadership coaching, and I'm a Clifton Strengths certified coach. So I spend a lot of time on StrengthsFinder. And about 5 years ago, I was given the opportunity to choose whatever career path I wanted. And with the door wide open, I chose this, and I love it. Absolutely love it. So today, what my goal will be is to share an overview of a framework that you can use to structure your leadership and some various uses for that. Feel free to jump into the chat at any time with any questions or anything that you have. We'll have a time dedicated at the end to kind of go through questions, but don't feel like you need to wait till then to write them down. Record them as you have them. And as we do that, I'll first start by kind of introducing myself a little bit more. We'll talk about different stages of leadership, and then we'll talk about that framework, get that overview before we come back to questions. We'll also have a poll at some point, so keep your eye out for that. When I go to workshops or webinars, I find it really nice to know who's actually talking to me. Usually we hear about people's credentials, but it's also nice, I think, to hear about people from a personal side. And one of the favorite ways that I've learned to do that is a Pecha Kucha presentation. This is a style that was born in the Japanese architectural industry, and it's a visuals only, 20-slide, automatically progressing every 20 seconds deck. I'm going to share mine with you, but I'm just going to give you 3 slides. We don't have that much time today. So this is my family. We have 4 kids. We are all learning together what it means to stay home and save lives. So we are all learning about distance learning over the last week. That has been, a little bit of a roller coaster on some days, but it's a good thing. I'm a little bit of a data nerd. I always have been. When I was a kid, I lived in Los Angeles, and if you've been there, you know that people spend a lot of time on freeways and stuck in traffic. So one of my hobbies was collecting information about the cars around us. I would sit there and jot down the make and the model of the car, the color, the license plate number, and then I would take it home and organize it in my little index card file, just kind of keeping a backup for the DMV in case they ever needed anything like that. That was what I thought was a good time. I also really enjoy kayaking and hiking in the woods. However, I found it really important to clarify that I do it for the peace and the stillness and not for any kind of adrenaline rush. I like kayaking on still water, and I like hiking in places where I do not feel like I might be eaten at any time. So I stick to places like Tryon Creek. I'm looking for the peace. So that's a little bit about me. Hopefully that helps you get an idea of kind of who's talking to you. Now, I told you we'd start with different types of leadership. And for our purposes today, I've divided into 3 groups, the different types of leaders that there are. We have aspiring leaders, practicing leaders, and advising leaders. And this is where we'll have that first poll. Which one of these stages best describes you at this moment? And you can answer that as we go through and talk about what those are. So for
So
Aspire,
we have about 50 people on the phone with us today and or on the computer on the webinar with us today. So I think we're going to find a whole range for everybody that's out there listening. Yeah, you're going to see between hopefully 45 and 50 answers to this question. So tell us about each of these stages.
great. So aspiring leaders don't have any direct reports yet. They're focused on demonstrating their potential. They're looking for that next role. And it's important that they're becoming self-aware as they develop that presence that will allow them to get that next role. Practicing leaders do have a team of direct reports. They are learning to facilitate results through others. This is a big thing, and it takes a while to learn. There's a steep learning curve for this. This isn't something that we are trained on or that we are taught. We generally get promoted into a leadership role when we have done well producing the work ourselves. Facilitating that through others is a whole different skill set. And this is one place I spend a lot of time working with clients on. They're focused on localized results, their team, their department. They are further developing their self-awareness, and they're beginning to translate that self-awareness into an executive presence. And then advising leaders. These are people who have a team of leaders of their own team, who maybe are leaders of their own team. It's a little bit higher up on the organizational hierarchy. They're focused on big picture results. Maybe part of their job is providing the vision for their department, or maybe even the organization. They need to be self-aware, and they need to be developing a really strong executive presence. And they are becoming fully capable of large-scale group movement. This, again, is a place where I spend a lot of time with my work. Let's go to the next one. And as we talk about leadership, I think it's really important to define what kind of leadership we're talking about. When I talk about leadership, I'm thinking of the job of creating the environment that a group needs to do its work. Sometimes people are thinking of your personal presence as leadership, or sometimes people are thinking of being a role model that kind of demonstrates what other people should be like. That is not at all what I'm talking about with leadership. I'm talking about the work of creating that space for your team to do their work.
Let's go ahead and launch that poll now, Sarah, and see what people are self-identifying with.
It looks, are the results visible there, or is that just me who can see them?
I think we can all see them.
Oh, perfect. So yeah, practicing leaders, that tends to be the largest group of people, typically. So yeah, that's great. So this framework will be really helpful for you. It's helpful for anyone at any phase of leadership, but I tend to aim it frequently at practicing leaders, so that is great. Okay, I'm gonna close that. The framework that we will be talking about today is the GRPI model. This was created by Dick Beckhard back in the 70s, and it's a simple model. It's straightforward, and some people critique it as saying it could be a little more complex, and I agree, it could be, but I think simple is better in this usage. This is a great foundation, a great place to start, and then you can add complexity in. It stands for goals, roles, process, and interpersonal dynamics or interactions. And before we jump into what all of those are, I want you to think in your own leadership, which one of these do you think you tend to focus on? Do you focus on goals and making sure people know what they are and getting people to them? Or maybe you find yourself doing a lot of work with interpersonal tension or anything like that. Go ahead in the chat and just type one of the words associated with these pillars about which one you focus on. And maybe you'll end up chatting, I don't focus on any of those. I'm focused on, executing on responsibilities or something else entirely. That's fine. Go ahead and just type in which one you think you focus on, and we'll dive into that. Before we do, why do we even need a framework? That's important to think about. This framework is providing the pillars that create that environment for your team to be able to do their work. If you do not build these strong pillars, you're going to end up spending your time answering questions about them and solving problems that come as a result of not having them.
Sarah, can you state the words for GRPI one more time? We have some people in the chat box that want to just hear each description one more time so they can kind of weigh in on where they spend their time.
Yeah, goals, roles, process, or interpersonal. And I can see in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of interpersonal.
I
Yeah.
just put
Okay.
process in, which kind of bums me out.
Process is good. So without these pillars, there's a lot of confusion and there's frequently unnecessary conflict. So let's get into what they are. We're going to start with goals. These are your foundation. This is where you always want to start. This is the first thing to get clear on with your team. And you're going to be asking yourself questions to help do that. Most of us know generally what our goals are, right? There's usually some number associated with them, or there's some kind of part of my job is that I put on a conference, or I, do the marketing plan for this new launch or something. But we want to really deepen our understanding of what those goals are, asking ourselves questions like, what does success actually look like when we do this? And I'll give you a hint, it's probably richer than just a number, right?
So I'm kind of curious, Sarah, you were talking about self-awareness a little bit before. How does self-awareness play into or layer over the paradigm that you're laying out here?
Yeah, self-awareness is a really key part in this. So we have our kind of explicit goals that have been outlined for us by someone higher up than us, but we also have values. As leaders, as people that are leaders, we have our own set of values and kind of expectations of what work looks like, or what it is to be good at something. And it's important that we know what those are. So many people that I work with couldn't actually tell me what their values are explicitly. That's a process that we go through. And so it's important, one, that we identify what that value is. I'll give you an example. You may be a really competitive person, and maybe you're working in a sales environment. And so obviously your team is going to hit their number, right? That's not a question. But the fact that not only are we hitting our number, but we're number one in the stack ranking, that's going to happen when I have a competitive value. Or maybe you're someone who has a really high value of relationship building. And so you don't care so much about the stack ranking, you care much more about how did we partner? And are we partnering in a way that deepens those relationships and brings us more work in the future, right? So that value is influencing how we expect our team to show up. So first we need to identify what that value is. Second, we need to recognize that not everyone has the same values. They're going to be different. So we have to make our values explicitly clear to our team about what success looks like in our group.
So are you saying that if the three of us are all working on the same goal, okay, Lauren, Sue, and Sarah are all working on the same goal, that our values will our values will influence how we work towards achieving that goal? And those could, in fact, almost kind of maybe butt heads. If I'm really competitive about it, but Lauren really wants to bring people together and make them feel good.
Right.
We could be working on the same goal, but working against each other because of values. That's so interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so as a leader, it's part of your job to put that on the table and make it discussable and have a common, this is what our successful work will look like. So one of my values is continuous improvement. So even though something is finished, that doesn't mean that we don't go back and look at it again to see if there's something that we could do better, 6 months from now or something like that, right? And that will make somebody absolutely crazy whose goal is competition or something like that, right?
Right.
So those things have to be discussed and fleshed out as part of what a goal of what success looks like is.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. The second one is roles. And we have our job descriptions, we know what our task is, but anytime you're working in a group, there are gonna be questions that come up around roles. Who is actually responsible for what exactly? Who has the authority to make what decision? Maybe if you're working on a short-term project, what roles do we even need in this group? How are we figuring that out? Those are some of the questions you would ask about roles. Also, talking about self-awareness again, we have these defined roles. We also have undefined roles, kind of the way we tend to show up in a group. This goes back to being really aware of ourselves and how we show up. So it might be that anytime you find yourself in a group setting, you find yourself being the note taker, or you find yourself asking questions to the point where it kind of feels like you might be annoying other people, or you find yourself trying to slow the group down and make sure you have all the information you need before a decision is made. Or the opposite, you find yourself trying to push for action. What are we doing as a result of this? So as a leader, again, we want to make this discussable. Let's talk about these roles that we find ourselves falling into. Are they working for us as a team? Are they working for you as an individual? Is this a role you want to lean into, develop, and leverage? Or is this something that we want to reshape and redefine as we move forward together? The next one is process. And Sue, you said you spend most of your time here.
I don't know if that's really true, Sarah. It was just in the moment, since
Sure.
I've spent kind of the last few months or last month learning Zoom and, kind of figuring this all out. Right now, it feels
Sure.
like we're learning new processes.
Yeah. And that's a really fair, contribution, in that even if you find yourself spending most time in process now, that isn't an always, right? That's kind of a snapshot of now. Some people might find themselves spending most time in interpersonal right now. That doesn't mean that's what they do the majority for leadership. Some of the questions you might be asking in this pillar, and again, I should clarify, these are questions that you can ask yourself and then share with the team, or you can do this collaboratively as a team. How do we answer this together? Do we have a defined process for the work that we're doing? How does our work fit into the greater organization's workflow? How do we store and share information? How do we make decisions? What do we escalate? What do we do if there's a conflict? How do we network? Alice last week gave such a great presentation on a different way to network, right? What is the expectation around interacting with clients? How do we communicate? Wasn't it Tatiana just earlier in the week also was talking about different communication styles? Making these things discussable and a common understanding is how we create this pillar, this environment for the team to do its work. And then finally, we have interpersonal dynamics or interactions. These are things like, how much trust does the team currently have? How much respect? What would the team need to increase trust levels or respect? Sometimes people get into personality dynamics here. Well, I'm going to pause on that for 1 second. Let's go back and look. What do you think the majority, Lauren? Could you tell the majority what people were focusing on in the chat?
There was a lot around really everything, but interpersonal definitely stood out.
Okay, great. That's pretty typical, right? People focus on interpersonal quite a bit, and most team building retreats or workshops that happen tend to focus on interpersonal things, right? How are we getting along? But, and this is super interesting, when the research is done on any kind of conflict or problem that we're trying to solve as a result of these interventions, we can find that 80% of these issues are sourced in a goal definition, goal clarity issue. It's not actually an interpersonal problem, it's a goal clarity problem. 80% of those issues are solved by goal clarity. On top of that, another 15% are solved by a role clarity issue. So most of the things that we're thinking, it's a personality conflict or we're just not getting along, are actually I am super unclear on what success actually looks like, or I am super unclear on who's responsible for what and how we do this.
Sarah, what was the number again for your goal clarity? I got 15% on roles, but what percent of problems can we solve with goal clarity?
80.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
80%. So
yeah.
I guess we all better work on goals.
Right. And taking them time to really get into the nuance of the goal, right? And making it really clear and rich, not just sticking with, okay, here's a number that we meet. So, great. I promised you some uses beyond just kind of team structure, although that's a really great use, right? Whether you're forming a new team, whether you are a new leader on an established team, or maybe you're an established leader on an established team, but things just aren't kind of going the way that you would want them to. This is a great diagnostic tool to kind of check in on, are we all clear on the goal and what success looks like? Are we all clear on where the roles are? You can also use this for short-term projects. You have an established team, you're doing great, and you're coming up on a 3-month project or something. Take the time to set up these 4 pillars first before you dive into the work, and it'll save you a lot of frustration. You can use this for meeting structure. What is the goal of our meeting? What are we hoping the outcome will be? when do we know that we're done? Is it because our hour is up, or is it because we actually met this goal? What are the roles of the people that are here? Do we want people to be asking questions? Is this a brainstorming creative meeting? And if it is, what are the guidelines around brainstorming? Do we really just want our participants to be listening? If we do, we might want to switch that meeting to an email, right? We can also think about this as a format for job descriptions. What are the goals of being really clear with the applicants about what the goals of the organization, of your group, of their individual role? These are all really helpful information that will help you create this environment where your team can be successful and they can show up doing the work that they're good at and what they were hired to do. So, do we have any questions about the GRPI model? You could jump into the chat, or so we talked about opening up, being able to hear people talking.
Absolutely. We can open up the mic and you guys can ask your questions with your voice. I just want to jump in while Lauren's opening it up. It's really interesting because one of the things we've been talking about with these dine-ins are what are some ideas that you can take back and use with your team right now, whether you're managing that team or whether this is an idea that you bring to the surface. And what I really like about this is, you know, since our dynamics of teams have been completely tipped on their head anyway, we're all working differently. This is a really opportune time to really talk about some of these things. I love the idea of using this model and saying, what is your bias? You were talking about biases, Sarah. Is your bias to speak up? Is your bias to process in the middle of the meeting? Is your bias to question all the time? Really interesting to kind of understand what, you know, individuals bring to each one of these stages during this time. That could be a fun exercise.
Yeah, and to your point about, you know, the space that we find ourselves in with most people working from home, some people have more time to focus on kind of setting structure like this. Some people are finding they have a lot less time, they're busier. And also it's worth paying attention to our business model has changed, right? So now we have a new set of goals and we have a new set of processes about how we do this. Giving the attention to the fact that this isn't just working from home. This is a different kind of work in a different environment. What are our processes? What are our goals in this new model of work? Absolutely.
So I have a question. We've got, you know, what if you have a toxic work environment and you want to really dive in and try and solve where this is breaking down in the model? Do you have any recommendations on where you start? Do you start with goals? Do you start with, you know, interpersonal? Where do you start? And how do you start?
As a coach, I always start with questions. And a toxic work environment is very broad, right? It could be any number of things. So I always want to know a lot more details before I could recommend a path forward. But I would start with questions. We talked about using this as a diagnostic tool. And you can set up just kind of a check-in, maybe almost a survey of where do we stand on goals? What's your understanding of our goals? What's your understanding of how your role fits in? And just collect that information from your entire team and find out if there's any kind of misalignment or where things are happening. I don't want to shamelessly plug services, but that's the time, toxic work environment, that's the time that you bring somebody in to kind of objectively identify what's happening and what system is being created that fosters that environment.
All right. Do we have some voices out there? Glenda, Toby, Lauren Otto, are you guys out there? Can we hear you? I can't.
I can't. I do see one person posted a question, Suzanne, are goals and outcomes the same thing? And they absolutely can be. They don't have to be, right? Frequently your outcome is what is the results of your work. And your goal might include, how do we go about doing the work? That might be part of what your goal is. How are we interacting together? What are we valuing as we do this work together? Let me know if that doesn't quite answer your question.
Okay.
Sarah?
Yeah, hi.
This is Eileen Schmidt. So having had the experience of having worked in a quote unquote toxic work environment, I often find that's coming from the very top. So could you talk about leading up with this model, because you can control
Yeah.
the area you're in, but if you've got chaos for whatever reason coming down from the top, how would you approach that as a leader in an organization?
Yeah, and that's one of those things that can be different in every single situation, right? A lot of my clients find themselves being a buffer from the chaos coming down so that it's not being shared with their team, right? And some of my clients have benefited from getting really a clear framework like we've talked about, and then sharing that with their supervisor. This is the way I'm moving forward. Can you tell me if you have a different idea of how this should work, right? The more that we can make explicit what we're working with, the more we know how our manager can know what they want us to be doing differently, or what their expectations are. Or maybe not even what they want us to be doing differently, but give us the room to actually do it. If you do you have more specifics that you're willing to share on the toxic work environment that we can say more
I just
specifically?
think, I think what I have found is sometimes there are people, like you said at the very beginning, who have been promoted into roles where they're not really ready to lead.
Right.
And they may be, for instance, so focused on the interpersonal and keeping everybody happy. So toxic is a very broad term. It's not working, or, it's creating, it's getting in the way of achievement in the organization and actualization. So let's say you have somebody who is focused on pleasing everybody. So you can go into one meeting and they agree with that person, and go into the next meeting and they're agreeing with what that person has to say. So from my perspective, working for people like that, even I love, and agreeing, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm seeing, I'm doing this as a way, I want to tell you my perspective and the impact on me personally. But I'm just curious about how you've helped people with that.
Yeah, oh man, that is so frustrating, isn't it? That's one of my most frustrating things. And what we have found to be helpful is to ask your leader for what their goal is. Ask the same questions that you would be asking of your team. So in this process, what does success look like for you? And then when they're waffling, right, and going with what the other person said, you're coming back and referring to that. So earlier you said success would look like this, and it sounds like maybe someone gave you a new perspective, or you have a new idea. Are you shifting what success looks like? Should we realign where we're going? Or are we sticking with the original? It's a really tricky thing to manage. I absolutely acknowledge that.
Sounds like a definite goal problem too, where your goals can shift depending on who you're listening to, which does happen.
Which, when we haven't taken the time to really identify for ourselves what our goals are, it happens all the time, right? That person made a great point. We should probably think about that.
Right.
Which is why it's so important to get this so clear for yourself.
Thank you.
And
One time one person I worked for who was a manager, they were trained in management. It was a fantastic thing. And we took the goal, each direct report had the goals that we were working on. And each one-on-one that we had with him, we had to update our progress on that goal. So by the end of the year, you had 52 weeks if you were meeting every week, but 26 weeks typically of progress against those goals. The beautiful thing about it was it kind of kept us focused on the goals. And so we didn't have somebody that was, pulling us away from those goals in the one-on-one meetings. It worked really well for tracking goals and attaining them. I really liked that process.
Nice. That's awesome. That's great.
All right. Well, do we have more questions out there? You guys all have perfectly working organizations. I'm proud of you.
So this is Kim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, because we're on DSL, so sometimes the feed is a little slow.
Okay, we got you loud and clear.
All right. So my question is that I work. I'm a manager. I have an engineering background. And the staff who work for me are all operators. They're all men. many come from a military background. And so when we talk about values, diversity is probably not on their list. So how do you deal with, or how do you address that idea of trying to think of diversity and bringing in a different way of operating as opposed to a more command and control structure?
Yeah, and this is a team that you are leading?
Yes.
Okay. So part of your work is going to be selling the benefits of diversity, right? And really persuading, influencing your team on why this is an important aspect for them. And you can tell them, just like you're saying, the command structure, right? You can tell them we're going to be more diverse, and you're going to get a whole lot more pushback. Nobody's going to move with you on that. Part of your role is going to be facilitating the learning about the value of diversity, about really convincing people that this is something that will benefit them in some way, and that might be part of your own personal goal with your team. Is where are people currently sitting on this idea of diversity? Does that kind of answer that question for you?
Sarah, on top of that, one of the things I've learned about the military, which has me totally in awe over these last couple of years, is that perhaps there isn't tons of value placed on diversity, but there is so much value placed on learning. You know, every time you move up an organization in the military, you have to go through a 2-week training before, imagine this, you guys, before you take on a new role. You have to train for it. What a novel idea.
Wow.
I mean, they really take this seriously. So I wonder if there's a back door to this problem of learning. You know, you know how you have to train in the military for the next position. Let's think about training for diversity. I don't know. I mean, I toss it out just because I'm very impressed with the types of training the military does now. I had no idea until I started talking with people who had been through it. So
yeah, that's a great idea. I love that.
We've got Denise asking for some more examples here. She'd like to have some more examples or more in-depth examples on how to use the model. She has a small team that's going to double in size. Wow, that's good news. That's really good news to hear. And at the same time, they're working to kind of merge with another team's operating model. So she has a lot of alignment, storming, forming, norming issues ahead of her. So how can she really use this if you have some specific ideas on how she can bring that team together?
Yeah, you're referring, Denise, to Tuckman's model of the norming, forming, and then storming as you move ahead, right? And again, without specifics, it's really hard to be specific. But it sounds like you're not able to decide necessarily for yourself what these are. People aren't joining you. You're truly merging, and you're going to need to combine these things, right? And so if there's another leader that you're merging them with, or if it's the team as a whole, I'm not sure. But being clear on what this means for your team, and then doing some diagnostic work to understand what it means for the other team, and figuring out what you can actually combine to become one team together, I think is a first step. I would want to talk with you more to be able to give specific recommendations for something like this. I don't know, Sue, do you have any ideas on that one too?
You know, I just kind of go back to what you said in the very beginning. I love the idea of getting people to bring their personal how they do their values. Yes, that was the word you used. Bring your values to the table on each one of these things so we can learn how each other works. I may have mentioned this on one of these before, but someone talked at one point about doing a user's guide to me, about having every person on your team do a user's guide to me. And I think this could be a really fun thing to publish, to create for your team. And you could use GRPI as kind of the foundation for it. When you think about values, you know, how do you, Sarah, again, can you just go back to that, the first level slide, and say what you said to us a few minutes ago, you were talking about how people address goals differently. Can you
Talking about the values there? Yeah. Yeah. And before I do, you were saying that, this the kind of a map of me or the user guide to me or something. I think that can be really helpful, especially if you take the time to kind of coalesce that all into a map of us. And how do we as a team work together, and our expectations and what are we doing? So when we were talking about goals and those values, and tell me where you want me to go with this, but we all have these kind of biases, as you said, or these values of what is important and what makes that influence our expectations of what we expect of our team, of what good work is, of what success looks like, of the way that we approach things. And we're frequently not clear on what those are, even for our own selves, because we think it's the norm. Of course, this is the way we do things. We don't realize that this is something specific to us because of our set of values. So getting really clear, there's exercises and processes you can do with a coach or with a consultant about identifying what those values are and how you tend to use them. And here's the key, right? Is this something you want to continue leveraging? Do you want to dig into it even deeper? Or is this something that hasn't been serving you and it's an unfair value and expectation to put on other people? And being intentional about what that is and what your expectations are.
So you were saying one person might value getting it done fast, achieving the goal fast. The other might be, competing and, really showing up in the process. Another person might value bringing the team together and, making the team all feel good about the goal. So I can see, the user guide that I heard of in the past was more like, what time do you like to be called? Or, emailed, and what's your favorite method of communication? What's your favorite tool? But this would be a much deeper dive into that than what's your favorite method of communication, getting people really to kind of, think about their personal style and their, be aware of it, have some self-awareness around that would be really interesting in the process.
Yeah. And these are really heavily influenced by our personality, right? I work a lot with StrengthsFinder. So a lot of the times, whatever our top strengths are going to show up in our values as well. So any kind of typing instrument that your team has already used, going and looking at that and understanding how that's affecting your expectations of work can be a really useful thing, right? Whether it's that we work independently and then bring the work together, or that's we're figuring it out together in discussion. These are expectations that are wildly different and really affect people's feelings of, are we actually doing good work here or not? Or does this feel like I'm wasting time when we get in a meeting together? So thinking about any kind of typing that you've already had and how that translates to the way that you like to lead, I think is really important.
We have one last question here from Lauren Francis that we can get into, and then I think we better wrap this up. It's about technology. They are implementing so many new tools in our organization because we're all working differently. Asana, Slack, Copper, having difficulty shifting to all of these online tools that are now critical to doing virtual work. It's a hard process at the moment. So any advice on how to help shift the team, help shift her? I think that's what you were asking, Lauren. If you want to speak up and clarify any more on that question, feel free.
Hi, guys. This is Lauren Francis. And yes, we are implementing many new new tools, and my team is are of the younger generation. And so they're very, very used to a lot of these tools, and it actually helps them work better. I'm still trying to catch up. And so when it comes to process, it's causing a little bit of a snag for us. So wanting to share that information to see if there was any help that you could provide.
I have an idea, Sarah, but I'll let you go first.
I'm really curious about your idea now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. My thought goes to almost GRPIing this issue and getting to what is the goal of all of these communication devices, and what are we trying to accomplish with them? And is there one that you can prioritize? And first I will learn this one and become really fluent here, and then I can add another one on. But I'm curious what you're thinking, Sue.
Well, I bring this up because I feel like we have a similar issue just with Women's Center for Leadership.
Mhm.
And it is that nobody really wants to be fully mentored anymore. And I make my hands go like this because there is this idea of mentoring that, you know, I am teaching you everything I know. Mentoring now is more of a co-mentoring thing because we have different skills. People who have been through a great deal of their career, you know, like myself, have some skills, but Lauren has skills that I don't have. So this idea around co-mentoring, putting people together in your organization, specifically saying, okay, you know, Lauren, what are you best at, Skype or Copper? Okay, great. I want you to teach Sue Skype, and Sue is going to share with you somewhere she's been, some learning she's had. So I almost wonder if you couldn't roll out kind of a co-mentoring situation in the next couple of weeks where people could really spend one-on-one time and teach each other like you're teaching your grandmother. That is the thing, because when I ask my kids to teach me stuff, they try and teach me like they're teaching Lauren. And that just doesn't work for me because I feel your pain, Lauren, on all the new technology.
Yeah.
Thanks to both of you. That was great.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, Sarah, our time is up. This has been fantastic. This is where we can find Sarah, everybody. And you can also find her at WCL meetings quite often, definitely after fives, which will, you know, probably have some sort of near light or new life in the near future. But I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Sarah. I want to thank everybody in the audience for tuning in again, and we'll see you again this Thursday. And as a closing, thank you from WCL. And, you know, I just want to remind you guys that WCL is a 501c3 nonprofit, builds all of its budget from having meetings, and we're not doing any of those anymore. So, you know, if you can think about a cup of coffee and what you would put into a cup of coffee each day, and at some point just kind of take yourself over to womenscenterforleadership.com and put in your $3.50 as a donation for coffee, we'd be happy for any little bit. $3.50, we'd be thrilled. If coffee isn't in your budget right now, please join us every week, every day anyway, because we'd love to have you.
Yeah.
Thanks
and
so much. Go
Can
ahead.
I just add that if you had a question and I was saying I'd be helpful with more specifics, feel free to email me and we can talk it through. We can get into those specifics. Reach out. Feel no pressure about that. Sarah@gambitcoaching.com. I'm happy to discuss that with you. And thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
And you guys are going to have to circle back to the website in the near future to get recipes. We haven't loaded these yet, but we are putting together some awfully fine dine-in recipes. So we will see you on Thursday. Thanks so much. Have a good lunch.
Happy birthday, Sue.
Yay, thank you.
Oh, happy birthday.
Oh, there's a
Facebook
cup
told
of
me.
coffee, you guys. womenscenterforleadership.org/donate. Price of a cup of coffee.
Woohoo.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.